Our state has some incredible problems. My name is Lynn Hinderrocker. I'm here to talk about that with you and talk about the trends that have shaped this state and dragged us in one direction or another. We're not really we're not realizing the dream we had way back in the early 2000s or even around 2008 or 9 or 10. My name is Lynn Hinderrocker. Welcome to WOWBIZ Nebraska. We're going to get it on right now. Is there anything more important than our ability to think? It's a core thing that we all need to think about. We kind of forget about our ability to think or reflect or calculate or deduct. We're going to talk a little bit about that with our guest today. My name is Lynn Hinderrocker, and again, thanks for joining us here on WOWBIZ TV. My guest today is Jason Bryan. Jason, thank you so much. You're a consultant, you're a training and development guy, and you're kind of an expert in critical thinking. Is that correct?
That is. I've done quite a bit of critical thinking work for the Air Force and for the NSA and just kind of all over. So yeah, I've done some stuff.
All right, so tell me, just to kind of get this ball rolling, what is critical thinking? Why is it different than any other type of mentation, so to speak?
So really critical thinking itself, at least in the way that I like to think about it, is that critical thinking is active thinking. So critical thinking is actually proactively structuring your thoughts, understanding what those structures are, and then using your abilities to deduce your way through a problem in an active way. And so critical thinking really is that thought before you actually get to the point where you solve a problem or you make a decision.
Okay, so as you're coming at a situation, you're being more conscious or more careful about all the assumptions or elements that go into it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly right. And so part of that is assumptions, part of that is looking at structured ways of thinking through a problem, right? And so you have brainstorming is the biggest one everybody talks about, right? Brainstorming is a huge critical thinking technique. And what you're doing in brainstorming is you're actually thinking beforehand, before you put a product out to market, before you get to the point where you're looking at, why aren't consumers buying my widget or whatever it is that you've got going on.
Right.
That critical thinking, or that critical thinking element, that structured piece of critical thinking is something that you're doing before you actually make your decision. You're working your way through the problem.
Okay, so I'm going to sum it up by saying it's analytical.
Yes.
That'd be correct.
Yes.
Okay, now I want to talk to you about this. Is a really important question because it seems like, and I've done a lot of brainstorming sessions, by the way, and a lot of them aren't so effective, frankly, or they don't achieve what we want them to achieve because of social dynamics. People don't want to stand out. They kind of want to go along with Joe over there because he's a buddy of mine and he said something. I kind of want to reinforce that. And so there tends to be a groupthink kind of situation that occurs. But also, there doesn't seem to be a balanced emphasis on creativity. So I'm trying to emphasize here that it's kind of a left brain, right brain thing.
It is. It is.
And I want to ask you what you think about that because I'm a heavy right brain guy. I believe in intuition. I believe in all the elements like that, and I think deduction, although we need to get a lot better at it, I think there's a cap or some kind of a limit there. But I'm not sure, I guess.
So let me put it this way. You said that you believe in intuition, you believe in all of that stuff, but
I do.
But anything that you're doing that's based on cues and signals, right? That you're getting in, and those are things that your brain has processed over your lifespan, basically, and made these mental models for yourself, and that's called bias.
Yeah.
And so then you start to look at your bias when you're talking about groupthink and mirror imaging and probably 101 different biases that are out there. But really, critical thinking itself it's recognizing when those biases, when those different things are coming into play, and understanding structured approaches to get out of it, right? So the brainstorming session that you talked about, where you said, there's all these different personalities that are out there, and they start talking over one another. Well, when you structure a brainstorming session, you're talking about having a facilitator that is leading it, that understands that there are actually rules to brainstorming, like categorizing things, making sure that you're going through and getting everything out there, but then also bringing it back and using the elements that are actually pertinent to what it is that you're trying to solve. And so a lot of that stuff it's using that bias, using that piece of us that is there, right? That creative piece, but throwing that into a structure in order to ensure that you're getting the right results in the end.
Interesting.
Because, sorry, real quick on this, because I said bias a few times. I just want to make sure that it's clear. Everybody says bias is bad. Bias is not bad. Bias is actually very good. It's something that we naturally do.
Sure.
It's when our bias is affecting either somebody else negatively or the results of our work negatively is when bias is a problem. Outside of that, bias is actually a very good thing.
But I want to ask you about conditioning and being self-aware.
Okay.
Because you're not mentioning much about that, and I think as we go through the analytical process, we do have to be able to examine ourselves or kind of be aware of ourselves and saying, I'm getting kind of heavy into this.
Exactly.
Or I'm talking too much about this and I'm kind of ignoring maybe this aspect of the thing.
Totally.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole thing, you know, when it comes to not just critical thinking, but to everything, right? Is that we have to be motivated to self-improve. And so critical thinking doesn't come without a notion or a gumption inside of you to want to self-improve.
Yeah.
Because then you would never really look at those biases that you are exhibiting or even go to learn about the biases that are out there to learn about what you're exhibiting. And so at some point we have to have some type of intrinsic motivation to move forward, and without that intrinsic motivation, nothing happens.
Why don't some people have intrinsic motivation, in your opinion? I know this isn't really on target with critical thinking,
No,
but
that's
it
fine.
is related to our inner self and getting things done through other people. And I'm just curious, why do you think some people do not have the same level of motivation as others do? Self-esteem, conditioning?
So certainly, you know, all of that plays into it.
Somebody told you were dumb when you were 3 years old, so you say, well, I'm not capable of having that discussion with
Or
somebody?
on the other side, everybody told you were smart your whole life, and so you never really had to try to be smarter. And so that comes in two ways, and that's the thing, is that really those parts of it are hard to decide. And at some point you have to realize in this world, even though we're expanding, there are still people that do not want to take an inward look at themselves, that do not want to grow. And that's just a fact. And so you really have to structure your thought processes around not changing everybody else, but understanding how you can change yourself and what you can do to better impact the
That
world.
will indirectly then allow them to change.
Exactly. Hope that at some point what you put out there reaches someone that will drive them to want to change themselves.
Yeah, this comes up all the time. Don't try to change other people, change yourself.
Exactly.
You know, this is related to this. We talked about creativity a couple times. You know, there's Newsweek had an article a couple years ago about the creativity crisis. And I want to know what you think about this. They tested all these kids and they followed them through school, kindergarten, all the way up into junior high and so on. And what they basically saw were students that had been trained to perform, students that had been trained to get good test scores, and get into college and so on and so forth. Very directed kinds of people and somewhat fairly disciplined actually. But if somebody just gave them a sheet of paper and said, write down whatever you're feeling right now, they were absolutely blocked. They had no idea what to do. There were no criteria, there was no, no way to be graded, or just say, hey, come up with a poem, sing a little song for us, make a little song for us right now. And a huge percentage of them were completely baffled. Now that's not the way young kids used to be, okay?
Agreed.
So the creativity
Somewhat.
crisis, so you see the gist of that. Now how does that fit into the critical thinking paradigm, in your opinion?
So I think that there's a couple topics there that you hit on, right? Some of that is generational gaps, right? So, because you said it's not the way that kids used to be. And so then you're talking about a discussion between millennials, Gen X, baby boomers, yada, yada, yada. Why?
Might be more humankind, but go ahead.
So the first question I would ask you is, what are the consequences? What are the consequences of not writing anything on the paper?
Or not being creative?
Or not being creative. And so, but really when you look at again, those intrinsic motivators, you have to look at what's going to drive someone to do something. And generally, that's consequences. Good consequences or bad consequences, but you're getting something out of it. And I think
you're talking about external thing, external rewards.
So sometimes it's external and sometimes it's internal, right? But it depends on the person.
Sure.
Sometimes people like to see a smile from their mom or their dad or their friends. Sometimes people just like feeling the satisfaction.
Sometimes
of doing a good
self-expression.
job. Exactly. And so really what you're talking about is those drivers, those motivators, but really those come from a lot of times understanding consequences, both good and bad, and wanting to derive those consequences in whichever way that they come from.
Right,
and I think that we live and again, this is just my opinion, this really is not critical thinking in itself outside of just
I'm pulling you a little bit out of that.
Yeah, kind of where we're at today, but a lot of it has to do with, you talked about that generational gap. Well, when you think back 15, 20, 30 years ago, while people may have been creative off the bat because there were dire consequences sometimes, right? So if you go
and they didn't have a lot of resources. So
right, if you go back 150 to 500 years ago, if you made the wrong decision, you died, right? So you got malaria on the Oregon Trail. That's how that worked. But now today, people always talk about, lack of creativity, but really there's a lot out there. It's just there's so many more people that are out there that are using separate consequences in their own life, but you're also seeing an influx of people that don't have the consequences. And so when you see these high growth areas, or when you see technology,
so you think consequences is critical to
technological
fostering
advances, totally. And so I think that, and it's understanding that in themselves and understanding what's going to drive and motivate someone to do something. And once they key in on that, it's almost like, what are those like water fork thingies? Once you get that, it's a tuning fork, and it goes, and you find your motivation, and you can run and move forward. That's it. But sometimes people can't find that motivation.
Yeah. Well, that is a very interesting conversation, Jason. I really appreciate you kind of diving into that. Not everybody can do that, by the way, and go with me on that. And to be able to see frankly, the flip side of your commentary is also interesting.
Good.
You just pretend you're me trying to find a hole in your analytical monologue.
I'm going to poke that right there.
No,
that's my poking.
I didn't mean to really poke, but there is a counterbalance point.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, I come back to the left brain, right brain thing. But that is a very interesting analysis, and you've got a book coming out you're working on? Huh?
I do. I have a book. It's called Active Thinking, and so basically it's how to start using critical thinking in your life, and that active actually. I've worked with the military for a long time, so it's an acronym. But critical thinking breaks out to an acronym that's analytical, collaborative, thorough.
Sure.
You can go
By
all
the way,
down.
this has a lot to do with employee engagement.
Yes.
And that's a critical issue in our business culture these days. About 50 to 60% of us don't really care so much about what's going on in the office. So I really appreciate you moving us in that direction here at WOWBIZ Nebraska. It's a very insightful conversation. I appreciate. Good luck on the book.
Thank you so much.
All right. And come back and chat with us some more in WOWBIZ Nebraska. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that we can uncover. Peek underneath the underneath the hood, so to speak, and find out and share that with our viewers right here on Cox 22. Thanks so very much. I'm Lynn Hinderrocker. This is WOWBIZ Nebraska. We'll be right back with our next guest. Imagine traveling around the entire world as an international business executive working for a medical healthcare company and technology firm, and then finally making that career decision, an interesting transition, and coming down to or maybe up to Burwell, Nebraska. I'm Lynn Hinderrocker. This is WOWBIZ Nebraska. Thank you for joining me. We're going to check out what happens when somebody does that and what's clicking in an executive's mind. And we're going to check in with Mr. David Sawyer, who's Head of Economic Development in Burwell, as I mentioned before. David, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Lynn.
You bet. Pleasure to have you, sir. And thanks for coming all the way down here to be part of this event.
Sure.
As an economic development person in Burwell, I think a lot of our viewers are maybe not familiar with Burwell. I'm going to get back to your career in a minute. Tell us just in a synopsis what the brand of Burwell really is.
Well, I think the brand of Burwell, first of all, we're still an ag-based community as much of Nebraska, rural Nebraska is.
Sure.
However, we have a special little something extra which attracts a lot of visitors to our area.
It would be like the secret sauce.
Yeah, the secret sauce
All right.
is the natural resources in the area, which include the rivers and the lake and the sandhills. And so agritourism has become very popular in our culture today, and Burwell's right in the middle of that. And so a lot of ranchers and farmers have kind of picked up on that as well and realized that we have something very unique to offer. And so that brings a lot of extra visitors to our community to show it off. And so that benefits us in the way of retail business, housing, all kinds of things, on top of the base of a solid agriculture market.
Sure. And how many people now live in Burwell?
Just in the community itself is a couple thousand, so it's relatively small.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the only town in the county, However, if you looked at the last census report, you'll see that if you look at all the growth communities across Nebraska, Garfield County, Burwell, Nebraska, the only growth county in rural Nebraska. And so you have growth in Omaha, Lincoln, Grand Island, Kearney, not North Platte, but and then Burwell, Nebraska.
Very unusual,
Yep,
Burwell, that's amazing.
7.5%. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact of what I said before. We're able to show off the community to a lot of folks.
Now, did you have to, when you got there, had they already realized that they had these resources? Did you have to like package them? How do you package natural resources? Or is it really just a matter of saying, hey guys, I don't think you really know what you got here? How do you package up and showcase those kinds of resources?
Well, a lot of it is marketing to some extent and communications.
Sure.
Photographs, video, all those types of things that we can do to help us brag about the assets that we have.
Sure.
And just to get people's attention. So,
you know, this term agritourism, which I've seen it bounced around a lot, but until this moment, I'm not sure I really understood what it is. Why don't you explain it a little bit more? Theoretically, what is agritourism? Is it just hanging out in farmland and appreciating the fields and the cows wandering around? I mean, what is it?
Well, you know, that's a great question, and a lot of our locals in the Burwell area ask that question too. Why would somebody from New York want to come to Burwell, Nebraska and enjoy the uniqueness of our whatever we're offering?
It's so authentic.
Yes, it's so. But let me give you a couple examples. Okay.
Yes.
In the spring, you know, we've of course heard about the sandhills cranes and so forth.
Yeah.
But we have the Nebraska prairie chicken dance, which happens in the months of March and April. And we have visitors from all over the world.
Nobody told me this.
Germany, you know, California. They'll come and they'll get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go out and sit in these blinds just north of Burwell and watch the prairie chicken dance. It's just incredible. And so even Jane Goodall.
What is a prairie chicken? It's a chicken that looks kind of lean and mean, or what?
It's native to Nebraska, and they stay in the same area their whole life
right?
and so forth. It's very unique, and it's unique to Nebraska, and so we. It's just something.
You know, Nebraska's
that's very cool.
kind of reinventing itself right now. I'm wondering if prairie chickens might be a core element in that idea.
And another idea is, I mean, for example, one of our ranches north of town, it's the Schweitzer Ranch. They for years they operated the ranch. They supported one family. They wanted to be able to have the kids come back and have their families there too, but there wasn't really enough business there to take care of that.
Yeah.
And so they got into the agribusiness, or agritourism, if you will.
Yes.
And so now they're doing sandhill safaris, jeep tours up on the sandhills.
They're
doing tubing and tanking trips down the river, and there's 3 families living there now.
Wow, so it really is generating revenue.
Yep. That's Calamus Outfitters, yep.
And amazing. Now, you know, I have to tell me what it's like to be an economic developer. Before, just tell us what you did very briefly before this, and as you became an economic developer, then I want to learn what the inside scoop is on being an economic developer.
Well, the two activities that I did before, which I kind of combined in this, what I'm doing now, is I was vice president of marketing for Siemens Hearing out in New Jersey for years.
That's a massive firm.
Yep, it is a global firm. And then I'd served in civic, you know, on city council and the mayor before.
So very active, yeah.
And so this gave me an opportunity to bring those two together, the marketing and promotion, together with the civic background, to be able to do a job where I'm able to kind of brag about a very exciting and unique community, and market it and promote it and work with businesses. And so it's been awesome.
Do you write a marketing plan for Burwell, or some kind of a strategy plan?
Absolutely, yes.
Yep. And is that kind of the same thing as you did last year, kind of a retread of what we've done in the past? Or do you sit around and kind of reconceptualize what the city could in fact be, and kind of in an open-ended way? I'm just curious.
It changes a little bit each year, depending on what's happening and what our needs are at that time. But we get involved in my office. We're also the Chamber of Commerce office. We're also the tourism office and community development.
Oh,
so
wow.
Everything from helping with the new storm sewer system, the new community conference center that we're going to utilize to bring more people to the community. We're involved in all those activities, and even working with businesses to help sustain their business. I think a lot of times community economic development, we think of bringing more businesses, a new manufacturer to town.
Correct, yes.
But in small rural communities in Nebraska and across the Midwest, I think economic development is about appreciating the businesses that you have and supporting and helping them continue on successfully in the future. So what can you do to help them be strong?
Sure, sure. Now, you integrate the Chamber of Commerce and the economic development. We all know that they're kind of related. Some people say, well, the Chamber is more PR and marketing and sales of the community. Yeah. Why isn't every economic development and Chamber of Commerce blended together in the same office? Or it just seems like they would be so synergistic, and yet I can tell you there are communities where they're completely disconnected and they're off doing their own things.
My guess is they've just started at different times, and they've just evolved. And so as I visit with my colleagues around the state at different conferences and so forth, I didn't really fully appreciate how fortunate I was to have them all three combined rowing in the same direction, because I do hear about the frustrations and the different interests or the different priorities.
Right. It's a very interesting thing. Well, tell me, what's the future of Burwell and what's your future? Each of them in less than 30 seconds.
Well, because of the growth that we've had in the community and the increased attractiveness of the community, our number one goal right now is developing more and better housing. And so that's our bottleneck right now. We have employers that want to hire people, but they will interview. The spouse will come to town, they'll start looking around for houses, and there's
no place to live.
No place to live.
Affordable, particularly.
Yeah, and so and a good quality. So we've been demolishing old houses. We have some very aggressive contractors that are building new houses. We can't quite keep up, and so that's a bottleneck for us. And so that's a priority. Creating the city infrastructure to make that happen. That's a big nut to crack.
And what about the overall message that you're sending out across the state? Do you focus on the northern part of the state, or do you try to cover the entire state? When you want to communicate with people, who are you focusing on? Who do you think's going to come to Burwell, other than an executive from Siemens in New Jersey?
Yeah, right. Well, in terms of marketing for the community, we reach out a lot to like Omaha, and Omaha and Denver and Kansas City. Those are good markets for us because we're within a day's drive away. And so we're a great place, a great destination for a mini vacation.
Okay. I was wondering what the pitch is.
Yeah.
But I get that.
And I think what we try to do is kind of shock people a little bit with some of the things that we have. Like, who would think that you could relax on a white sandy beach in central Nebraska? But we have that. Calamus has white sandy beaches all the way around it. No weeds, no vegetation.
That's nice.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so, because we're in the sandhills, you put water on the sandhills, you have a beautiful situation.
Any other thing that's particularly unique? You've really done a great job of telling us. Anything else we've missed here?
Well, this year we're going to be celebrating the 98th year of Nebraska's Big Rodeo. And so it's one of the largest outdoor rodeos. It is the largest outdoor rodeo in Nebraska.
Is it?
And it'll be the 98th year this year. And so and it's a professional rodeo. 4 days, the end of July.
Wow, 4-day event.
Yep, 24th through the 28th of July this year.
Wow.
And we get over the course of the 4 days, about 20,000 people will come up to Burwell. I have no idea where they all stay. There's tents and yards.
I was going to say, there can't be much housing or motels there.
But I usually end up parking cars. That's one of my jobs during the rodeo, to support the rodeo.
That's at the bottom of the job description there, David.
It is.
Economic development right there.
But I see, but what I learn is where people are coming from. And we get plates from Colorado, Kansas, Texas, Iowa, South Dakota.
You're doing a good job,
Nebraska's
David.
Big rodeo.
I love that. Roll up your sleeves and get out there and see the customers and know what they're doing.
It's an awesome thing.
Where they're coming
Nebraska's
from.
Big rodeo.
Absolutely. And quickly, what's the next step in your career? You're going to stay with this the rest of your life? Somebody going to come carry you off someplace else?
I'm getting pretty old, so I think
but are you getting equally wise, would you say? Is that going congruent with your aging?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, well, I think you've done a great job describing revitalization of Burwell, and congratulations again on being that growth city in that category.
Well, I think a lot of communities can do that if they think outside the box a little bit. I just don't really agree with the whole thought that small communities have to dry up and die.
Yeah.
They don't. A lot of it has to do with just somebody needs to be the spark plug in that community to be creative.
I love it. I love it. I'm Lynn Hinderucker in WOWBIZ Nebraska. David Sawyer from Burwell's kicking it. Thank you, sir.
Thank
We're having
you.
a great time chatting. We'll see you next time on WOWBIZ Nebraska. Thanks for watching.